I'm Olivia, the National Organizing Manager for the Secular Student Alliance. Hello. And thank you, everyone, for being here today for this awesome webinar where we have Campus Takeover and Voters Not Politicians going to talk about some really important information that is going to be super beneficial for this election cycle, especially. Jada, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
I would gladly do that. Hey y'all, my name is Jada McNeill or Jada Onaganor. I secretly eloped in December with my fiance, and so I'm navigating this whole name situation. So that's a fun fact if anyone cares to know. So yay for that. But yes, I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Tampa Bay, Florida, St. Pete specifically, if you know where that is. And I am the program and development coordinator for the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, or SLSV. And SLSV is the national hub and largest nonpartisan network in the U.S. dedicated to increasing college student voter participation. And one of our many programs and initiatives that we manage is the Campus Takeover program, which we'll be talking about definitely in depth later on. But just know that I am one half of the Campus Takeover team, and I'm very excited to be here. And thank you so much, Secular Student Alliance, for inviting me.
I can go next. My name's Sithara Menon. I'm the Campus Engagement and Support Coordinator for the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition. And I am the other half of our Campus Takeover team with Jada. So I work on a lot of our programs to support student leaders and campus leaders to make sure that they can work on democratic engagement programs on our campus. So super excited to talk to you all and share some more about what we're working on and how you guys can all get involved on your own campuses.
All right, I guess I can go next. Well, of course. Well, good evening, everybody, or good afternoon. My name is Alyson Grigsby, and I am the Education Programs Manager with Voters Not Politicians, and I'm currently based in Detroit, Michigan. So while our organization, we are very much focused on expanding democracy and citizen action within the state of Michigan, I hope to bring a lot of the information and experiences that we have done to other states and see how students can get involved in both engaging their local elected officials and making voting safer, modern, and more accessible.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. So first, we're going to start with an opening segment where you guys talk a bit about your organizations and voting, and then we will go into the part where I will ask you guys questions and hear more, and then we'll do a summary and Q&A at the end. So Jada, if you want to start with your opening.
Yeah, certainly. So Campus Takeover. So in order to understand what the Campus Takeover program first, we need to understand what the civic holidays are and how our program is connected with it. So I'm going to do something in the chat. I'm going to ask three very quick questions to get some engagement because that's the kind of person I am. So one, I would like to know, has anyone ever heard of the civic holidays? You can put whatever emoji or you can put yes in the chat just to kind of get a gauge of people's knowledge when it comes to the civic holidays. I'm just curious. Don't be shy. No, okay. Yes, yes. Some no's. No, got it. Okay. And so my second follow-up question, not people say, second follow-up question for those who are familiar with civic holidays, have you ever signed up and celebrated the civic holidays before? And you can put yes or no. Some no's, got it. All right. And then the last question is, who even knows what I'm talking about when I say the civic holidays? Which a lot of people I see are not familiar with the civic holidays, so that's very fair. That's why we're here. So with the civic holidays, they're nonpartisan days of action that strengthen and celebrate our country's democracy. They bring together a wide range of organizations, nonprofits, corporations, in the pursuit of America where everyone participates and votes, there are 4 total civic holidays, with National Voter Registration Day being the first civic holiday to kick off the civic holiday season. It is the oldest civic holiday, first observed in 2012. And this day is dedicated to getting people to register to vote, as well as checking your registration status. And so that is what National Voter Registration Day is, or NVRD, because I might use the acronyms throughout this panel. The second civic holiday is National Voter Education Week, or NView as we call it. This week is observed during the first week of October and is solely focused on voter education piece. The third civic holiday is Vote Early Day, and just like the name, it just encourages people to go out and vote early, and some of the benefits of doing that. And then the last civic holiday is Election Hero Day. After everything's said and done, it's just a day to celebrate and thank all the election heroes for their work, for getting people to mobilize to go register, as well as to go out and vote. The whole point of the civic holidays really is to be a very easy, low-lift way for any organization, nonprofit, corporation to incorporate civic engagement within their networks, as well as making voting celebratory and fun. I know we all know, or some of us may know, like voting, there are some people who are super passionate and love it, and then there's some people who could care less about it. And so having the civic holidays is a way to kind of engage people that you may not have otherwise, and to make it celebratory, as well as informing them and educating them on what they can do when it comes to voting. And so I'm going to pass it to my colleague Sithara to kind of talk about how the Campus Takeover connects with civic holidays and why they're important.
Yeah, thanks, Jada. So Campus Takeover is an extension of the civic holidays. So it is a national, nonpartisan effort to specifically mobilize students around elections. And we work to create a culture of civic engagement on college campuses during these civic holidays that Jada just mentioned. So we focus on colleges and universities because they're natural hubs for student engagement, and we're focused on helping students turn out to vote and supporting student voters in particular. So we know, and I'm sure you all know, that colleges, universities have specific challenges and barriers to voter engagement work that are specific to the fact that they're higher education institutions and the fact that they serve student voters who have their own specific barriers to getting engaged in the electoral process. So that's why we have the Campus Takeover program at all. It's designed to specifically support this work on college and university campuses. And by really centering our efforts on campuses, we're able to help students realize their identities as voters. We're able to help remove common barriers for civic engagement, especially barriers that new first-time voters face, and create a culture of voting and nonpartisan civic engagement on campus that students can then carry with them long after they graduate, because we know that when students get engaged in voting, they become lifelong voters, and it can create an entire lifelong generation of more civically engaged citizens in our communities. And so our program exists specifically to provide support and resources to folks on college campuses so that we can make it as easy and fun as possible to get engaged with these civic holidays and help students mobilize and organize their communities around the 3 major, what we call our pillars of voter engagement. So voter registration, which correlates with National Voter Registration Day, voter education, which correlates with National Voter Education Week, and voter turnout, which correlates with Vote Early Day. So that's our Campus Takeover program, and we'll talk some more about how y'all can connect to that when we get into the questions.
Thank you, guys. And then we have Alyson with Voters Not Politicians.
Great, thank you so much. So just a little bit of background on Voters Not Politicians as an organization. Again, just as a disclaimer, we are mainly a Michigan-based, people-powered, nonpartisan organization where we really want to center voters, not politicians, in aspects of our state government and representation of the people. We actually started in 2016 as a group of disgruntled Michigan voters who were fed up with the partisan gerrymandering that had happened in the state, and we really wanted to create a truly representative democracy. And through that, over 6,500 volunteers had gotten a constitutional amendment passed, which would put an independent commission of registered regular voters like you and I into drawing the districts that determine our state and federal legislators, and really trying to create a government that can truly represent the people so that the politicians listen to the people and not the other way around. However, as not just a ballot initiative, we had actually stayed together after these efforts, and we formed a family of organizations to empower regular citizens like yourselves in understanding the different changes with elections and what changes you can make in your communities. And we really wanted to strengthen our democracy against a lot of these increasing threats that we've been experiencing, such as the big lie and other concerns surrounding democracy, including educating a lot of our voters, especially underrepresented voters, students, people of color, about the different local and state government practices, early voting and voting access, and collaborating with a lot of local organizations to make voting as accessible as possible, mobilizing various activists through engaging their local elected officials, through doing ballot initiatives and canvassing, really trying to bring this narrative of having a pro-voter democracy within the state, and making sure that our lawmakers are held accountable for their votes and their positions. We really want to emphasize pro-democracy under these main points of accountability, which is, are your legislators, your elected officials, whether that is in your local government or state government, are these people accessible and enable the people that you're able to talk to relating to these voting issues? Can you bring up concerns about voter accessibility or inaccessibility where you live? And are these people truly responsive? And in order for our legislators to be truly responsive, you do have to have, of course, fair maps equaling fair representation. And of course, with this, you're also going to encourage more pro-voter policies, as we have seen in Michigan, for example. When you have a legislator who is not sitting in a gerrymander seat, but is one that is more competitive, they have to be more responsive to the people who are voting for them. And they know that their seats, their positions in the legislature are not 100% guaranteed, and this can be applied, in a very bipartisan way. So I would say that the main goals of the organization is really trying to find ways that local citizens, just like you and I, can get empowered in engaging our local government leaders, and emphasizing the ideals of a pro-voter environment throughout Michigan and across the country.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyson. So I have some questions for you guys. I will start with, can you each discuss how lack of access to ballots can affect voting, and how can people vote early? Lack of access to ballot collection places as well.
Yeah, I can kick us off with that question. So with lack of access to ballots, historically, we have seen or learned about the impact of restricting ballot access to people in general based off gender, based off race. There's periods of time where women couldn't vote, Black people can vote, as well as currently what we're dealing with, felons not being able to vote, although there are some efforts to kind of restore their voting rights. But even with that, there are some caveats that they have to navigate that creates another barrier from casting their votes. And so in addition to those disenfranchised communities, there are also communities that face increased barriers, such as college students. And one of the common barriers that we see that impact college students specifically is photo IDs. So photo IDs, around 35 states require some sort of photo ID in order to vote. And so some of these states also offer photo or non-photo alternatives that you can do. But in general, those are states that do require. And then we also have 15 states that do not require, plus the District of Columbia that don't require students or people to show their ID to vote. And the issue with this is mainly because, one, usually students, when they enroll, they have student IDs. And some states, I believe 12 states, don't recognize student IDs as a form of voter ID. As well as there are so many different laws when it comes to what type of ID is acceptable. It varies by state. So in Florida, for example, our IDs, you have to have an unexpired photo ID with the signature. The signature is the key part in this. And so with student IDs, traditionally there are no signatures on there, so it's not valid. But even if it does have, let's say, a signature, there is no expiration date on that, which also for them, they could say that is expired. And so this is an issue that we see oftentimes with students navigating what IDs they need to use if they don't have the acceptable ID per their state. And also too, in my time as a campus administrator, I realized, especially like with my students, they didn't have driver's license. They're not driving. And so they don't have these things. And even if they do, it might be a state issue ID. And some of these students don't even have that. And it could be because of cost barrier as well, because these things are not free. And these laws also impact people who are housing insecure and homeless as well in the process of voting. And so that's something that we typically see as one of the common barriers. Is just, unfortunately, student IDs aren't being accepted as an acceptable form of voter ID, even though they are vetted by their institutions. And it's something that, different institutions do want to include, but it is, still a situation where it's still not deemed acceptable. Another barrier is polling locations. And so just where polling locations are located. Fortunately, for some campuses, they do have on-campus polling locations, but that's not the case for everyone nationwide. And so the barrier of getting transportation to go to polling locations can also just be an additional step that could be a barrier for students. Another barrier is elections are on Tuesdays. And so I think that's a barrier for just in general, like people who are working, people who are in school. So unless your institution makes it a national holiday, or if your professor cancels class or in class early, that also can impact students from voting as well. And then last point, I meant to mention this earlier when I was talking about IDs, but this also especially affects people of color as well as the LGBT plus community, and especially if you're transitioning and making sure that your name, if you changed your name, is the same name that's in the voting system, because that also can be a discrepancy within that. And so there's just a lot of little nuances when it comes to just IDs in general that can impact students. But the good thing is there are solutions that you can utilize for each of these things. And it's really about being proactive and being early to catch them on, essentially. And so just from like the campus takeover perspective, at least one half of it, this is like some of the common barriers we see when it comes to lack of access. And then I'll pass it to Sithara for like different resources and things.
Yeah, so like Jada mentioned, there are solutions. It can feel daunting when you hear about all of these different barriers, but once you know about them, there are tons of resources and ways to help address these barriers and organizations that can help you as well. But one of the major things we wanted to touch on is voting early. So when there are different barriers that you're going to face, as well as changing election laws, voting early can give you sort of like a buffer and a leeway to make sure that issues that you face don't prevent you from voting in the election at all. So we like to think of Election Day as sort of the last chance or the last day to vote. And if you have early voting or absentee voting or any way that you can vote early in your state, you can give yourself sort of an extra time in case you run into any issues or something comes up. Then you're able to fix those things and you're still able to make sure that your ballot is cast and your voice is heard before the last day, election day. So, for example, I ran into tons of situations when I was organizing on campuses where students went to vote on election day and they had a really small fixable error that they could have gone and fixed the next day and still been able to vote, or students who did go to vote early and didn't have the right ID with them or needed to fix a small error and were able to then go the next day, fix this error, and still be able to cast their ballot. So making sure that you're proactive and voting early on can really make sure that you're giving yourself that grace to be able to address any issues and make sure that your voice is heard despite any barriers that you might be facing. Additionally, there are tons of resources and organizations that can support you in making sure that you have all of the right information that you need and all of the tools that you need to vote. One great organization that's part of the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition that I'll shout out that you should all look up their website if you're ever running into student ID issues is Vote Riders. They do really great support work to help students make sure that they have an ID that's going to be voter ID acceptable. But the other thing that you can do once you know about these resources and about the option of early voting is you can make sure that you're helping your community learn about this by educating other students, your classmates, and celebrating Vote Early Day as one of the civic holidays to encourage, not only yourself, but your other peers to take advantage of these opportunities to vote early. Every community has different laws and timings for early voting, depending on your state election laws. So definitely look into your local elections officials website to check out when or if early voting is available in your community. With that, I can pass it over to you, Alyson.
Great, thank you so much. So I think one of the biggest barriers that I guess what we happen to notice, I guess, in access to the ballots, I think a lot of it really starts even as students and young people in general are registering to vote. And unfortunately, a lot of clerks' offices, Secretary of State / DMV offices, they're not the most accessible, whether you happen to be working long hours, be taking classes at certain periods of time, or need transportation to the polls, to these offices. Many of them, unfortunately, are still working on a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 5 kind of schedule, no weekends. So it can make it really difficult to reach out to get like your voter registration taken care of. I know in Michigan, for example, there is still the opportunity to register to vote online, but even when it's leading up to the election, you still have to go in person in many instances to have that registration to vote. Similarly, I think a lot of the things are just in general a lot of language barriers. I think especially for a lot of communities where English is not their first language, and if this information is put in place in these specific languages. And a lot of the things that we try to do to resolve this is through a lot of communication with the clerks and these elected officials to make voting more accessible. This can be something as simple as working with your clerk to shift their voting hours from, let's just say, a standard 9 to 5 to be something like a 12 to 8, maybe certain days of the week, working maybe a couple of weekends leading up to the election, or even just seeing ways that they'll be able to collaborate with student organizations who are focusing on voting to be able to expand the accessibility for students. A lot of our volunteers have done work in collaboration with student organizations and with the local clerks to have what we would consider satellite clerks' offices, where someone will be able to register to vote, fill out an absentee ballot, or even in this case, when we have early voting, do the early voting at these specific locations. I think something else that we would also consider, even just the locations of absentee voter drop boxes, for example. If the drop boxes in your college town are all located on one specific site of the city and they are located inside the buildings and locked up, it can be definitely less accessible for people, especially those who, of course, do not have cars or that specific transportation to get to those. So working to expand where you're able to put your absentee voter drop boxes, for example, that could be another solution in regarding to that. So I definitely say that we really want to treat these situations to as something that you'd be able to collaborate with your clerks and election officials on, not so much that they are adversarial or trying to make voting harder for students, but as an opportunity to really understand these election officials as people that can help you and helping out with the community. So there can be funding opportunities available, especially during state and federal elections, for you to look at what ways can students be able to benefit from additional voting opportunities on campuses, whether it is those satellite voting locations, depending on if your state allows it, the early voting locations, voter drop boxes, even if it is just a voter registration day a few days a week or drive-through voter registration, for example. These can be some of the barriers that can be overcome for college students and for young people who are registering to vote. And I just one other thing to, I guess, mention as well. I think emphasizing using or treating this the voting or election day as this final day, I guess, for voting. We really want to keep that messaging well, especially since Michigan now has early voting and many other states have something similarly. I guess one anecdote is that for a lot of the universities that we had, we were experiencing very, very, very long lines on election day in 2022, some waiting till I want to say 2 or 3 in the morning to drop off their ballots. So I really want to treat these specific opportunities of whether dropping that absentee ballot into the drop box or going to an early voting site, as something that you can take care of as soon as possible so that you don't have to worry about voting, upending your entire schedule or your entire day.
Nice. Thank you, guys. So I have another question. Earlier, you mentioned getting involved with your local officials with the goal of making voting more accessible for students. So I'd like to ask, can you guys give some tips on how to get involved with those local officials? How do you take those first steps?
I'd say in many of these cases, sometimes it could just be as simple as scheduling a meeting with your clerks. The information for their contact information is readily available on a lot of these local cities and townships websites. And having a coalition of similar like-minded college voting related organizations can definitely make this less intimidating. In our past experiences going with that and some experienced volunteers with other groups, even as with your local League of Women Voters, your college Dems or college Republicans, we can really establish that conversation of here is some of the information or the voting experiences that we as students have experienced on this campus. How can we work with you to make voting more accessible for college students? Of course, we want to treat this as not just we want you to do this, but we can help you, you can help us in achieving this common goal. So whether that is finding more research on what student voter turnout is looking like on your campuses, helping get funding from the university to take care of these voting rights expenses, but really trying to treat this as a collaborative effort between you, a lot of voting organizations like Campus Takeover or your local turnout, college Dems, college Republicans, and trying to make sure that this is something collaborative and accessible to as many people as possible.
I retweet everything Alyson said because we had some similar standpoints as well, but also from a campus student affairs mindset, is inviting these local election officials to campus, bring them to where the students will be. I know, for example, I had some Campus Vote Project fellows, and one of them did an event called Liddy with the City for National Voter Education Week, actually. And this was a way to get county commissioners to come. We had tacos, and it was a space to, one, make them visible and saying, hey, these are the people who can impact day-to-day life for your collegiate career, and also give opportunity for students to ask questions and to give them the student perspective as to some issues or things that they care about or is impacting them. And so such as, for example, they can have conversations about, can bus routes be free for election day to take students from campus to a polling location, or how to have a polling location on campus. So those are some conversations when you do strategic collaboration and partnership that you can have. But I would say most definitely one of the main things I was thinking of is just bringing them onto campus, having a dialogue, having a forum, having them like putting face to name, like this is the person that represents our district, because I think that's really insightful for them and also makes it even more accessible for students. And like Alyson was saying, you can easily find their information, but I do feel like it's slightly intimidating to just like email a county commissioner and saying, oh, come here. But it really is simple and easy. A key thing I would say is be mindful of when legislation session is happening, because during that time, their time will be limited. And so just being mindful of that when you're doing your outreach. And also too, just being mindful of just the perspectives that you have, so it can be equitable. When it comes to just kind of discussing certain issues and things. But yeah, bring them to campus, bring them where the students are.
Yeah, and the one other thing I'll add, I mean, obviously, like, retweet everything that both of you all just said. But I think the like smaller other pieces, like you can also go and attend like local meetings, like city council meetings, county supervisor meetings, and those are almost always public meetings that you can go out to and you can see what are they talking about? What are my elected officials actually doing? And there is usually some sort of public comment section where you can say, hey, I have an opinion about something that you guys are working on or something that you're talking about. And you can go there, you can attend, you can speak, you can submit usually like a written comment too if you don't want to speak in front of everyone. But I think it's kind of fun, so you should do it anyway. But it's like a really great way that you can go ahead and connect with folks in this space and really develop a relationship with your local officials when you're actually going to their meetings and showing up. I think most of the time, in my experience, local officials are really interested in what young people, their constituents in their community have to say. You may not always get a response right away because they're busy, especially during the legislative session, but that usually doesn't mean that they're not interested. They are generally very interested in what their community members have to say, especially if you are at a college and you reach out to folks who are representing your district or who represent your college campus at the county or city level. They definitely want to know what college students are thinking about. I've heard so many times from different elected officials when I was an organizer, like, what do students think? What do the students care about? What is the student's opinion on this? So as students, you should absolutely go and share your opinion and know that for the most part, it will be heard and it will be well received as something that folks are going to want to engage with and learn more about. And I think as students, you should really lean into the angle of trying to build those partnerships with folks who are representing the community that you go to school at, the place that you're spending most of your time at, and most of the time that you're living like on and near campus. So really encourage you to just learn about and really start to form those relationships.
Awesome. Thank you guys. So my next question, it's for Alyson, but I'd also love to hear from Sithara and Jada if you also have anything that you would like to add to this. But what is the importance and effect of grassroots organizing plus individual action?
Of course, had to find the mute button for some reason. But I do want to remind just a lot of the attendees just that our legislators are the ones who respond to us as constituents and not the other way around. Depending on whether you are living on the college community where you're at or you're not registered there, these legislators still have to respond. And you have a responsibility and the power to provide input to your local, state, and national elected officials about just abiding by the democratic process and what specific concerns that you have as a community. even if you're not, let's just say, a registered voter at your college campus, you still have an important voice as someone in that community. You still, I mean, you still live there, you still go to school there, you still patronize a lot of the businesses, you still make a lot of community in these areas. So I really advise you being able to establish these relationships where you are able to go to your legislators' town halls or their coffee hours, and just let them know about what specific democratic issues you are experiencing within your communities. And if they don't have the power, or if I guess I do really want to emphasize that, again, this is more of a responsibility for just both the legislators to listen and for you to participate, and for a lot of collective action, whether that is through your local organizations on your college campuses or through something a bit more regional slash national, like like the League of Women Voters or the National Socialist Party, Democratic, Republican parties. A lot of collective action really needs like a form of policy or something strategic in order to achieve change. Of course, a lot of us are really angry about certain issues and want to make noise, but we really want to put something behind it of these are the specific tangible things that we'd like to see accomplished. And we are not going to expect to see a lot of policy support for things if you don't have like these focused policy goals that we want to see changes in XYZ in terms of the legislature. There have been states, for example, that have set out to end gerrymandering, but the policy goals, they weren't fully set in stone. And sometimes those don't really end up any better than what they started with. But I think one of the final things I want to emphasize is that you are not alone when you are frustrated with any, let's just say, policy issues that are encouraging within your communities or even on your college campuses. You can ask, whether there are organizations who are working on this issue, have any similar concerns, or you could actually make a group of your own to really help with bringing attention to any things that you're particularly concerned about. And before you know it, you could end up changing your state's constitution or working to change policies at your university. But I really want to emphasize just having that line of communication with the folks who are in power, and knowing that you have communities and people who have the same, opinions or same goals that you have as well.
Awesome. Thank you. So this question is for all of you. What do you say to people who don't believe voting has any power?
I can start off with this one. I would definitely say that voting has quite a lot of power, and that young people as a generation have an enormous amount of power as voters and potential voters. Despite what you may have heard or you may be feeling is the, attitudes around you, students and student voters have had a really enormous impact on our democracy. Students had record-breaking turnout in 2020. There are a ton of studies that show that student voting rates increased at twice the amount of the voting rates of the general population, and that student voters actually achieved parity with general population voting. So students, people often say that students don't vote or students don't care, but the numbers show that students are turning out and students are making their voices heard and have had a really big impact in our democracy, both on the national, state, and local level. So we can tell based on the numbers of student voters that turn out that student voters influenced races like the presidential race, like the Georgia Senate race, like tons of governor races across the country. Student voters made the difference. And because, Gen Z is the largest and most diverse generation, and we're seeing the numbers of eligible students, right, only increasing the size by numbers of our youngest generations. There can be an incredible influence just by sheer numbers on any race that you look at and that you think about. There are organizations that are dedicated to studying the impact of youth voting and have shown that youth voters are going to have an extremely large influence in our 2024 elections on the presidential level, the Senate level, the House races, and obviously on the local level. And so even though the national political landscape doesn't always feel the most inspiring, you can know that if there are issues that you care about, there are absolutely like state and local elections that are going to have a really big impact on any issue that you care about. Like pick an issue off the top of your head that you're interested in. There are elected offices that are going to impact that issue in your own community. And you can have a really big impact on those. First of all, by voting as an individual, but especially by organizing and mobilizing your peers and your community members by turning other people out, you can have an extremely large influence as a student and as a student leader, especially. One example that I want to share with you is in Wisconsin at the state Supreme Court level. So I think some of you may have heard about Wisconsin State Supreme Court race that just happened. This was an odd year race, so folks thought, there may be not a whole lot of attention, there may be not a whole lot of organizing work going on. And people, of course, as always, operate under the false assumption that students don't care and so they aren't going to turn out, which we know that, the numbers absolutely disprove. But there was some amazing organizing on college campuses across the country that we know swung that state Supreme Court race and made the difference. There's some really amazing examples of organizing around some of the barriers that we've talked about. So for example, there were campuses that had ID printing stations where students could print IDs that would be acceptable, like official school IDs that would be accepted as state voter ID in order to get around and out organize the new restrictive voter ID laws that were in the state. And in certain precincts that had students, like the districts that the students voted in, they saw as much as a 10-fold increase in student turnout. And so many people who have analyzed the data of the students that turned out and the areas and where they voted saw that student precincts made the difference in this election, and that students mobilizing their peers and working to organize the barriers that they were facing and making their voices heard were able to elect a state Supreme Court justice who would be a tiebreaker and who would set the stage to be able to do really amazing things for voters, like making sure that the state could be ungerrymandered to have, like Alyson mentioned, fair maps that represent the communities, and to make sure that restrictive voting laws couldn't be passed that would further disenfranchise students, young people, communities of color, et cetera. And so this is such a clear example of students and student communities and student leaders especially showing that their voting and organizing around voting has a huge amount of power and can make the difference on so many issues in a really high profile state Supreme Court race. And I can pass it to Jada, who I think also can share a really great example of the power of voting.
Why, thank you. So this is a fun story. This is actually one of our coworkers, Zoe. So Zoe grew up in a small town outside of Baton Rouge, and she was a theater kid. And before her senior year, when she was going to be leading a school play, the funding for the arts program got cut from the public school budget. And so when it got cut, that was unfortunate, sad face. But during her first year at Louisiana State University, she learned about a ballot measure on her hometown ballots about levying a new bond issue that would fund the arts for the public school district. And so our coworker Zoe founded Go Vote at Louisiana State, and organized a voter education campaign and transportation from the LSU campus to their home district in the effort to basically swing the election. And since then, the arts have continuously been funded in her hometown. And so I say this to say that, of course, not everyone will have the tools or capacity to run an entire campaign. But if there's an issue on a ballot or things that you care about, you can help convince your friends. You can help them understand how and why to vote. And we can also, too, as just a coalition and program, can help you do that as well. And so a handful of votes can make a massive difference. And it goes to show, again, what mobilization can do and things that you can care about can help make an impact on different ballot measures that you really, really want to focus on, and all those things. So that's like a really cute, great story that I was just like, oh, wow, that's really amazing of just what, people and students can do. Just never underestimate what students' capacity can do.
Yeah, I think I really just want to highlight just both what Sithara and Jada had mentioned. And I think one of the big motifs is trying to find something or give something for people to vote for. I think one of the things that we're really experiencing a lot, I want to say in the past couple of years, is a lot of motivation to vote based off of fear that if you vote for XY candidate or if you don't vote for this thing, then the sky is going to fall and all the bad things are going to happen. And I feel like it's not really resonating with a lot of people. But instead, I want to think, or I guess I want you all to think about times in which there was an initiative that you were super excited about, a candidate you thought like we would, we really want to support this person and see them win, or this initiative that would totally change the way that our city or our state was going to run, and how excited you felt for those things. So, and a lot of that really was what motivated, voter turnout, especially from students and a lot of youth, whether that is through expanding voting rights, ending gerrymandering, additional funding for certain programs, that one progressive candidate. I remember when I was a college student, a poli-sci major, and I saw the people who were petitioning to put the anti-gerrymandering initiative on our amendment for that year. And I was thinking, as like I think a college sophomore or junior at the time, like, wow, one of the concepts that we're talking about is actually being put into something realistic that we can actually vote for. And I thought that was so exciting. So I really just want to remind people that there can be things that we can be excited about and vote for rather than simply just trying to vote against. And if you don't see that on your ballot this year, then you can collaborate to whether find, somebody who is running for office and really try to support them, or work to see if there can be something that can be put on the ballot for your city or for your college campus or for the state, for example. And I think speaking on the state and the city, one thing I also want to highlight as well is just do not ignore your state and your local politics. I really feel that I guess a lot of that seems to be overlooked when we're thinking about the grand scheme of things about wow, the president or wow, ex-congressperson. But I guess there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be running, for example, your city councils, your school boards, your library boards. Depending on your state, you can be voting for your university boards in your region, sometimes your clerks. And often those are overlooked, but you actually have a lot of control over who is going to be running into those and running into those positions, and then what policies could they put in place? How much money are they going to be allocating from their budgets to things like student services or to universities versus to things like whether that's police or additional funding for mental health resources or something like that. And so often what we were finding is that when we look at the voter turnout between the federal elections and the local or even state and local, sometimes state can be 40 to 50%, but local elections can be, as low as 12%. So in a way, kind of sad, but your vote does count more. But we really do want to increase voter turnout in a lot of these instances. And just really making sure that your vote counts in both not just in the federal space, but in a lot of these other spaces where you work and where you live. Our organization is pretty unique in that we do focus heavily on the state politics, and we are trying to reach out to, not just our state legislators, but also local elected officials, and how we can make voting more accessible. But that could be ways that if you feel that something is way too grand, how do we tackle something like the presidency? Start with your clerks. start with, just, I don't know, your local elected officials. And that could be something that could really step you in or help you step into more civic activism in a way.
Thank you guys for all of that awesome information. That was great. So we have about 12 minutes left, but one more thing I would love for you guys to go over would be how to do a voter registration drive on campus. So if Jada, if you want to start.
Certainly. So with Campus Takeover, that is especially in our wheelhouse. We have different toolkits for each of the civic holidays, including National Voter Registration Day. And within this toolkit, we literally have a very thorough breakdown as to what are the different steps you need to host a voter registration drive. And so some of the basics for hosting a voter registration drive, of course, is one, understanding if you need to participate in some sort of training or course by an elected election official, because sometimes you can't just pull a table and do voter registration, right? There are different state laws that you have to abide by. So that's number one, is just being mindful of what you need to do in order to do a voter registration drive. And then two, if you're going to recruit different volunteers, making sure that they're trained on that and aware of what they need to do to also just be legally doing this properly. The second thing, if you've ever planned an event ever in your life, of course, time, date, location, really being mindful of like high trafficked areas on your campus, also being mindful of any campus-wide events that are happening and potentially even tabling there so you can get more of a reach, and making sure also too you're abiding by your institutional regulations, and then also making sure that you also have help to do this. Volunteer recruitment is crucial for voter registration, because doing voter registration yourself is not as fun. I have done it. Talk to myself, but definitely having people to support the work is really important with voter registration, and also being strategic. Maybe you're on a campus with 50,000 people like UCLA. You might need to have a table in front of the library, cafe, or different areas. And I'll also strategically think about groups that have low turnout traditionally. So traditionally STEM majors vote at a lower rate. So maybe even thinking about how can you do voter registration for STEM majors or maybe other underserved communities, just within your strategic planning when you're doing a voter registration drive. Then, of course, I said volunteer recruitment, having a goal of how many volunteers you need. And also in the toolkit, there are different ways you can even incentivize volunteers. It could count as a credit for class or for their student organization when it comes to service. So thinking of things that way to get more volunteers. And also too, thinking about how can you make this engaging and fun. If you did not learn anything else from this, I want you to learn this. I'm gonna zoom in. You cannot incentivize voter registration, which means you cannot offer freebies or giveaways for people that only solely register. You have to make sure that whatever you have is for everyone. It is illegal to incentivize voter registration. This is a common issue and things that we see with college campuses saying, oh, we'll give you free ice cream if you register. You cannot do that. You have to be sure that regardless of what action people do, that they also have access to the same giveaway. There you can be strategic as to how you want to go about that. It could be toting a gray line, but in general, please, please, please do not incentivize voter registration by only offering things to people that only register. And so making sure you do that and have music, fun, and then collaborating as well with different student groups and nonprofit groups, grassroots. We talked about that. This is one key way to work with grassroots organizations for voter registration drive. So all in all, like I said, we have a toolkit. So hopefully that you all are aware of the civic holidays and campus takeover when we do our launch. You'll be able to sign up and we will have all the toolkits for you to make this whole process really, really easy for you, because that's our whole thing. And if we don't have a resource, let us know and we can figure out if other organizations has a resource, or we can just kind of brainstorm different alternatives for you. And that's my 2 cents on voter registration.
I'll add a couple of things to that. So beyond some of the logistics like Jada mentioned and not breaking the law, there's a couple of bigger picture zoom out recommendations that I want to suggest if you want to have a voter registration drive. So one of the biggest is to find out if there are folks on your campus that are already doing this and partner with them. Many campuses have existing student voting coalitions that are doing this work and would love to have folks like you all join them as volunteers or to partner with them as a student organization partner. And that way you can work with folks who have already been doing this work and maybe have some of the insight to some of the most effective and strategic ways to do voter registration on campus, and who already know what the legal and institutional rules are that you would need to follow. So looking for folks who are already doing the work and joining them is going to be the easiest way to get involved with doing a voter registration drive. You can just look up to see if there is a campus voting coalition on your campus. Almost all of them are named something like insert mascot of school vote. So I went to UCLA and it was Bruins vote, and almost 75% of the campuses that I've organized at had a similar naming convention. So try looking that up for your school and see if there's a voting coalition that you can get involved with. And if not, make sure that you check with your local elections office to find out about any trainings or other rules or regulations that you need to follow to make sure that any voter registrations that you do are legally acceptable and that those people will actually be registered to vote. They can also help you learn about any common mistakes or how to turn in voter registration forms if you do paper registration. Or oftentimes, if you reach out to them, they'll come to campus and do a drive with you. And then also, make sure that, when you recruit volunteers, like Jada mentioned, you train the volunteers that you're working with on common mistakes, as well as good organizing tactics. So for me, I always recommend registering to people on a regular printed paper form over having people do things like scan a QR code or send them the link, because people are always more likely to actually just fill something out right there and complete it, because sometimes they'll just forget or they'll get busy and they won't do something that you just send them a link or a QR code for. But those are some of my overall tips, but big takeaways: look out for Campus Takeover and our National Voter Registration Day toolkits, so that you can have all of these resources, and it'll make it super easy for you to do this on your campus.
I pretty much just want to highlight again what Campus Takeover has already said, but I think one of the big things, just don't think this is something that you have to do alone or reinvent the wheel on. Like they said, there are a lot of organizations who are probably doing similar work on campus on engaging students to vote. But if it happens to be a situation where you are the first person who is doing this, you still don't have to do it alone. Your local clerk's office can be a great resource in reaching out to them and seeing whether they can even come out or just provide you next steps on, making sure everything's in line with doing a voter registration. And even local, state, and national organizations, like whether that is your college Dems or college Republican groups, your local League of Women Voters, League of Conservation Voters, a voter organization like Voters Not Politicians, can help you in fleshing this out, finding the people power, guidance on specific election rules for your state. So really just rely on the connections that you have around you on your college campuses and in your city or state. And also as well, making sure, of course, that you're abiding by your university's rules. But I think one of the best ways is really just to find people where they are. So again, if there's going to be an event on campus, whether people are lining up to go to a sporting event, whether it is, the big campus club fair, for example. Find folks who are already in line, folks who are already going to tables, and really just find those opportunities where you're able to pass around a clipboard, give out information, whether that's a handout, register people to vote, get them signed up on a mailing list for future voting opportunities. So really just being strategic with what opportunities are already around campus on how people can get involved in their communities. So big thing, you don't have to do it alone. Organizations like us can help you.
Thank you guys. That was awesome. So we are about out of time, so we're just going to do one question from Debbie. I'm registered as a NPP, received a card from our county stating I have to pick a party to vote for a president. This has never happened before. Thoughts?
That's really interesting. So I do know when your party really matters if you're in a state that has closed primaries, where you can vote on potential candidates within the primaries. But this is something interesting, because it says the president. So I might reach out to maybe your local supervisor elections for more clarification as to why that is, because that is interesting. Because the only time, at least in my experience, I've heard of people not being able to vote based upon their party is because they're in a state that has a closed primary, specifically. So I'm gonna open the floor for the other panelists if they have more information on that specifically, because that's all the information I have that I can provide. Maybe it's somewhat helpful.
Can I ask what state you're in, Debbie? If you want to drop it in the chat or something for us.
Yeah, that will definitely be helpful. In California, because usually the state by state sort of thing, like I know in Michigan, for example, they do give out those applications, but only during the presidential primary. But all the other elections are usually open primary, where you don't have to be confined to a specific candidate. So that is rather strange. I would possibly reach out to your local clerk just for more clarification on why that is happening, or if there is an option for a third party.
I can also share a little bit about this as someone who's organized in California. So, California has modified closed primaries, so parties can decide whether or not they want to allow folks who are no party preference to vote in their party's presidential primary elections. So basically, like the party can choose what type of primary election they want to have and whether to let folks who are no party preference vote in that election. So you can look and see what each party in your state is doing for their primaries for this year. If there are ones that are closed primaries, then you would have to register with that party to participate. Or if they're modified closed, you can still decide to participate without changing your party preference. If they are closed, only folks who register with that party can participate, though. So if you wanted to vote for a specific party primary, you just need to look at what type of primary they're running in the state that year, which can be a little confusing, but you'll be able to find all that information on the state Secretary of State website.
Okay. Well, that was awesome. Thank you guys so much for being on this panel and providing so much useful information for our attendees, for our students. And that is the end. So thank you to the attendees for joining and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.